This episode is brought to you by Easy Wood Tools, your wood turning system since 2008. Alright, we're going to be turning a funline kit from Penn State Industries. And then we'll be using a Fool's Gold pen blank acrylic from Woodcraft. Alright, we're going to take our brass tube out of the bag and we're going to mark it on the blank. We're going to give ourselves about a 32nd to a 16th inch extra, and that's just for waste so we can sand it down flush, and I'll show you that in a little bit. We're going to go ahead and square up our line, give us a cutting reference. I'm going to go ahead and do the other side exactly the same to mark out for the second blank, because the pen we'll be using today will have 2 pen blanks. Alright, there's both lines. Alright, now we're going to take the blank over to the miter saw and cut them both down to length. This can be done with a handheld saw or a band saw, scroll saw even. Miter saw is just all I have in the shop at the moment. And there's your blank. I'm testing the size to make sure the tube fits. Now I'm just going to take this center finder I created out of scrap wood to find the center on the end of each of my blank. And that's so when I drill it, it drills the length of the blank straight. And I'm going to do my second blank exactly the same as I did the first. Here I am at my drill press, getting the bit lined up, and I'll drive a 7mm hole through the blank. You want to come up often to relieve the heat, relieve the waste coming out. You don't want to crack the blank or melt it. Alright, now that it's done, I'm checking both ends to make sure that the hole is drilled parallel. And I'm going to test the tube to see if it will slide through. I'm meeting resistance, so I'm going to have to take it out and clean up the hole just a little bit. Test the tube again and it falls freely. That's what we want. Alright, now we're going to take a little bit of sandpaper and we're going to rough up the brass tube. We're going to make sure that we don't see any shininess at the end of it. The reason why we're doing this is so the glue has something to adhere to on the inside of the wood and around the brass tube. If we don't do this properly, the brass tube will spin freely or cause the blank to break apart completely. Now it's time to insert the brass tube into the blank, and we're going to use the pen insertion tool. And we'll also use some medium super glue. I prefer Super T or Stick Fast. Alright, we're going to put the brass tube on the end of the insertion tool, and I like to put 3 long beads of glue equally around the blank, going from top to bottom. I then slide the tube while sliding it, turning it around onto the blank, and this makes sure there's an even coat of super glue around the entire inside. And I make sure one end of the brass tube is flush with the blank. Alright, now I take my blank and I need to square up both ends. I'll start with the end that has the brass tube flush, and this is just to make sure the brass tube is even with the end of the blank. I'll then flip it over and start working to bring in the extra that we left earlier during the cutting process. We'll bring it down to the brass tube size. I'm using the belt sander for this. You can use a disc sander, random orbital sander, whatever you have on hand. I would prefer to use a disc sander if I had it, but this is all I have at the moment. Now I'm going to mount the blanks up on the lathe. I'm going to use a 7mm mandrel with a mandrel saver. And on acrylic, I'm going to start making plunge cuts. I'm going to take small cuts. I'm going to use a small portion of the chisel. And I'm going to keep my lathe speed up around 3200 RPM. I'm going to keep making plunge cuts until I get it down to a round shape. And then I can alternate back and forth between making the plunge cuts and sliding my chisel side to side. When I slide my chisel, the goal is to get thin ribbons, thin continuous ribbons. I'm just going to keep working at the blank until I get down to the desired thickness that I want. And I'm using the Easy Wood Tools Easy Rougher, the full-size model for this. Once I get it down to shape, I'm just going to slide the chisel back and forth real lightly to smooth out the acrylic blank. And then I'm going to switch to the Easy Wood Tools Easy Finisher. And this is just going to be a round cutter head, and I'm going to start tapering the ends until both ends are just perfectly even with the bushing. And I'm going to use my fingernail to see if I can catch a lip, and if there's a lip, then it's not tapered good enough. I'm going to make sure I do this on both ends. Alright, now once I have it where I want it, then I will start on the second blank and complete it just like I did the first. Now that I have both blanks turned down to size, I'm going to sand them progressively from 150 through 600. And then for the second stage, I'm going to use micro mesh, and I'm going to wet sand it. And it's going to go all the way up through 12,000 grit. And as I get higher in the grits, I'll use less pressure. This way it's less likely to melt my pad. And by the time I get done, it's going to be polished and ready to assemble. Now I'm going to use my pen press, and I'm going to start to assemble the pen. I'm going to choose which blank I want to have the nib and which side of the blank I want to have the clip. Alright, I'm going to lay out all my parts so I can easily get to them. I don't have to dig through all these bags through the whole time. Alright, I'm determining which side I want to have the nib on it. I'm just going to open up my pen press and press the nib into place until it fully seats inside the blank. Now we need to take our transmission and we're going to enter that into the other side of the blank, and we're going to press it in slowly, not to make sure that we go too far, because if you go too far it's extremely hard to back it out, and if you go too far your ink will extend out too far out of the nib. So here I'm going to go ahead and put my ink into the transmission. I'm going to turn it and I'm going to determine if I need to press it in more or less. So I'm going to press it in just a hair more to get the end of the ballpoint pen exactly where I want it. Alright, and that looks good. Now I'm going to take the transition and I'm going to put it into place. And I'm going to determine which side I want the clip and cap to go on. Alright, I'm going to put it in place and press it. Once it's fully seated, I'll assemble the pen. I'll make sure it works. And if I want to line up the grain, now's the time to do so. And there you have it, a completed acrylic pen.